G'day everyone and welcome back to my lab and to our unit on creating an action RPG game in Godot 4. I've decided we're going to call this Zero to Zelda. It works for me. I like catchy titles and a bit of alliteration. If you recall, in our first lesson what we did was we set up our general project and we created a bit of a tile map for our player to explore. In this lesson it gets a little bit more exciting. We're going to be making our actual player character itself, as well as programming our first script, which is going to teach our character how it can move around the incredible tile map that you have made. So that's what we are getting stuck into today. The only thing is, see, I think computer video game characters can be a little bit personal. People can get really attached to their favorite characters, and you could argue that having a good character is the secret to having a good game. Now, if you're a bit old like me, and probably none of you are, then when you think about the ultimate computer game character, you're going to think about this guy. Or maybe you're a bit younger than me and it's going to be this guy, who's the same guy but he's different. Or maybe you're younger again and then it's this guy. I don't know, maybe Mario gets a lot of plastic surgery, but he seems to be looking better every year. Now, maybe you never went in for the Nintendo craze. Maybe, be it you being a young whippersnapper now, or for some reason watching this when you're a bit older and you're like, Nintendo, get out of here. Sega is where it's at. Well, let's also cater for you then. Maybe your favorite character is this guy. Or because he's a bit older now, it's this guy. And then somehow he also became this guy? I don't know. You can work it out. Video game characters can be really important to people, and the great thing about what we're going to do in this unit is you get to really experiment with what you think your best character is going to look like for the game that you've got in mind. Alright, so what are we going to be learning today? Well, we're going to be creating our player character and setting up basic movements so they can interact with the world around them. Why? Well, the player character is the heart of our ARPG. It's the character that the players will control and interact with the game world. The skills you're going to need today, well, you're going to need to understand and apply how to create and move your player character around the world. And success today, well, what will that look like? That will look like you having a player character that can move around and interact with the game world that you made in our last lesson. First thing we need to do is get our sprite ready. So last time we downloaded a tile map from Analog Studios. I was almost going to say Digital Studios. There's Freudian, I suppose. Analog Studios, which is someone on itch.io that had some assets available either for free or for donation. Now, this time, rather than using someone else's, I've gone and made a little bogan sprite strip. So if you don't know what a bogan is, I reckon if you're in my class, you know what a bogan is. But if you're following this on YouTube or some other means, a bogan is... well, it's an Australian cultural icon, you could say. You feel free to look it up on Wikipedia and you might find a few interesting things. So I've made a bogan to represent us Aussies in this. He doesn't fight with anything gruesome. He just uses a thong. Now again, if you're my student, you probably know when I'm talking about thongs, I'm talking about flip-flops, right? If you're following this from overseas, it's flip-flops, all right? Get the rest out of your head. So we need to download it. So if you're one of my students, you've probably got access to this already. It's probably already there for you. But if you're following this on YouTube, download it from here. So it's my itch.io this time, all right? So instead of borrowing someone else's, even though I do encourage anyone downloading that from itch to give that person a donation, if you are following along me, do not bother with donations for me, all right? Not needed. It's just part of the course. So go up to ajslearninglab.itch.io, go to the bogan player, download that PNG sprite strip and drag it, just like we did with the tile map in the last lesson, drag it into the Godot file explorer. Then it should appear, well, in the next shot, hopefully it'll appear above my head. Yours will be in that file explorer bit as well, and we'll follow along with creating our character and doing all of that. Excellent, I'll see you in Godot. Hopefully, like me, you've got your bogan up above you there, or up above me, I don't know, whatever. What we're going to do is create a new scene. So if you remember from last week, we had to create a scene and then we put a node in that scene, and that's how we made our world map. After we made that 2D node, we put in a tile map. So it's going to be a bit different this time. We're not going to be using tile maps and things like that. We're going to use a thing called a character body 2D. So what we need to do is we click on the plus sign at the top there next to our world scene, just like that, and that brings up just a new scene, a new blank canvas. So over here, last time we clicked on 2D scene, not this time. Come down to where it says other node, click on that. It'll bring up your little search window. We're going to look for character body 2D and open up that one there. So that gives us our character body 2D over here. It's got a little warning, ignore that for now. Not like a check engine light on the car, you should check those, but this one you can ignore for now. Now we want to give this a child node as well. So we're going to right click and go add child node, and what we're going to use is the animated sprite 2D. So that's now a child node of character body. It sort of inherits its attributes, it's connected. All right, so character body 2D, animated sprite 2D. Bosh. Now, over this side here, animated sprite 2D is now there because we've got it highlighted here. Remember, this is our inspector menu or inspector window. So all the bits of info to do with whatever we've got selected over here appears over here for us to have a tinker around with it. So animated sprite 2D over here, click on the animation, and we've got this one here saying sprite frames, and then next to it, empty. Click on the empty, go to new sprite frames, and then click on it. So we select new sprite frames from the drop down, and then we click on it as well. And that gives you a little new window down the bottom here for our animation. Excellent. So our first animation that comes up straight away is called default, which is, where's it? There somewhere. So we're going to rename that just by clicking on it once. It then allows us to change it. So I'm going to call this idle underscore down. Idle down. So that's when our player is essentially looking down the page, looking towards the camera in a way, and they're idling. So this is where we create our actual animation. This is the only one we're going to do this week. We're going to do a few more later on, and it gets a little bit more complicated in the scripting later on, but we're going to keep it simple today. So we've got our idle down highlighted. Over here there is a grid icon. We're going to click on that grid, and then it's going to want to know what file we want to open up to use those that file for our animation. So we're going to go to our sprite strip. I'm using the Bogan sprites. If you've chosen something else, just make sure you find that file name. The next bit could get a bit trickier for you if you're using a different file, because different sprite strips are going to be laid out differently. So we need to now actually tell Godot how many sprites there are going across the page and how many down the page to get this all working properly. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so we've got a better look. See how you can see there's a few rows, 4 rows in fact across, and 4 rows down, or columns across, rows down, but there is obviously way more sprites in there. So we've got to fix this up. So our horizontal here, what have we actually got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we're going to change our horizontal to 5. That looks right now. Each column is correct. What about vertical? Let's have a look. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All right, easy. So we change our vertical to 10. And that looks right. Every little character sprite has its own little box. Perfect. Next thing we have to do is actually select the ones that we want for the idle down animation. So we do that by just clicking, and we're just going to drag across here 1, 2, 3, 4, or including 0, so 5, and we're going to add those 5 frames. Here they are here. Now let's come up and zoom in. I promise he's there. He's just really, really tiny. We're going to zoom right in so we can actually see our dude. And if we click on the play button here, hopefully we get a little bit of that pointer head wobble going on. So let's have a look. Yeah, that's as good as I could get in an animation. So there we go, brilliant. Now, if we want this guy to actually load the first time we play him, so, you know, when we start the game, the player's going to be facing us. We want them to idle straight away. We don't want them just to be standing there still, right? So we're going to click on this little auto load button here. So you see we've got an A in sort of an arrow box. Click on that. It's going to auto play on load. So when we load the scene called play a scene, it will automatically play the idle down animation. Excellent. The only thing is now, he looks a bit blurry, and we can fix that actually quite easily. See, it's nice and crisp down here in our animation frames box, but up here on the actual tile map is super duper blurry. So if we head up to our project menu at the top, and then project settings, we can then find rendering textures. So the textures option in the rendering tab there, and then we've got this default texture filter. We want to change that from linear to nearest. The reason we're going to do that is it's going to actually change how the textures are filtered. I don't know why I need to say that. It's just going to make it sharper and crisper. That's the goal, all right? So I'm going to click on nearest. Hopefully my computer can catch up with us. And then we're going to go close on that, jump back into the main canvas of Godot, and then we will actually have a little test run of this to see if it does what we think it should do. So, all right, my computer caught up with me, and now we're back here, and our player is bopping away nice and crisply. Excellent, that's what we wanted. Let's save this scene that we've just made. So I'm going to go Command S. You might be doing Control S, depends on what platform you are doing this from. And I'm going to save this one as player.tscn. Now, what just came up there reminded me, it wanted to automatically call it character body 2D scene because I didn't rename the main node. So I'm going to do that now. Just going to click on it, and I'm going to call this node player. Now I'm going to save that again. And I'm going to go back into our world scene because I reckon I didn't rename something there too. Yeah, I didn't. It's still called Node 2D. So let's click on the Node 2D a couple of times, and then we'll rename that just as world. So now we've got a player scene and we've got a world scene. I'm saving them both. If we now click back on world actually, if we now want to get our player into the world and have a look at them, all we need to do is click on the player scene down there in the file menu and actually just drag it onto our canvas into the world. I'm going to zoom in so we can actually see what's going on. There he is there, right? So we've got our dude, he's in the world. Let's now play the game and see what we see. Actually, I was just getting a bit ahead of myself. Before we play the scene, we need to actually change the scale. Otherwise, it'll be a bit hard to actually see our character. He'll be super tiny. So what I want to do is head on up to project settings. Like we did before, we're going to go to the display window option and scale. Now this should be on 1. I'm going to set it to 3 and see how that looks. Now we can actually head over and have a play of our game and see what it is. So we come up to the top and we hit the little play button. It gives us a entry into our little window so we can actually see what's going on. Now it's possible I clicked that. When you clicked it, you might have got a little warning saying you've never selected a scene before. Just click OK. That's the one you want to have as your main scene. The world scene is the one you want as your main scene. So here's our dude. He's bopping up and down. I'm pretty happy with how that's come out. I don't know about you, but let's now save where we're up to. So I'm going to close this, we're going to save it, and then we're going to have a look at our script to try and make our player move around the screen. All right, so let's close it up, head back into Godot, and then we're going to play around with scripts. So here we back in the normal Godot canvas. Like I said, we want to put in a script. So on our player scene again, so click back to your player scene. So it should be there without any tile map showing, right? It should just be the player that we made. If you have a look in the top left corner above the player node that we made, there's a little sort of scroll looking thing with a plus sign. If you click on that, that's going to add our script that we need to be able to program our dude to move around. So we've opened that up, we've got player.gd, brilliant, and we're going to click on create. And what happens automatically when you create a script, you can select some options so it doesn't actually happen, but you're going to get a whole bunch of boilerplate there which might be useful. It's not going to be useful to us. I'm going to delete that. I'm going to paste in some new stuff. We're going to talk through the new stuff, and then we're going to see if we can move our little dude around. All right, we're back with the new script. So there's actually only about 6 lines of code. I've just put a whole ton of comments in as well to try and make this a little bit more understandable if you're having a read through. So feel free to pause it at any time and start reading what is on the screen. Hopefully it's in a high enough definition that you can read those comments. So what we're going to do first, so line number 2 there says extends character body 2D. So that's saying that the character body 2D, which is our root node of this scene, has some properties that we're going to use in this script. You could think of it a little bit like a library in Arduino. You sort of want to have the functions and the features that are built into that library, and you don't have to then code everything individually in your sketch. So we've got that. Then we're going to create a variable called speed, and we're going to set the speed. I actually said 400 in my comments. I mean that to be 100. I'm going to set the speed to 100, which works out to be 100 pixels a second, I think, something like that. I might be well off. But that's just a bit of an arbitrary number. You're going to want to get a feel for that as you go along. Might want to change it up or down. There is a really good reason for this to not be a fixed rate, but a variable that we can change. And that is that we might want to have collectibles and things along the way that give us boosts, like speed boosts. Or maybe when we get injured, we might slow down. So having variables that we can mess around with is actually a really good idea because it opens up a lot of possibilities to our games. If I think back to my favorite game, Super Mario Brothers, the 1983 classic or whatever it was, one of the great things about that really early home video game is the fact that your player could take on several different guises during a game. So you got the mushrooms to get larger, the flowers that allow you to throw fireballs, the stars that make you invincible and fast, and then they kept playing on that through all the iterations. Super Mario 2 brought in some new ones, and 3, suddenly you could fly like a raccoon. So there's a whole raft of reasons why it's good to have ways to change the gameplay during the game. So that's our speed. We're then going to call in this function physics process. I'm not going to explain that now, but for our must may might later, that's going to be an option for you to have a bit of a research at that. We're going to make a new variable called direction, and that's going to grab a vector, so like a direction and angle. And we've got a few different functions here, or keys basically, that when we click something that's associated with UI left, which would be the left arrow button, it's already programmed to do something. So we can just take advantage of that. We don't need to map those keys a second time. Down we go further. Now we've created this thing called velocity, and that's going to equal the direction variable times by the speed variable. And then we add move and slide at the end. And move and slide's a good option for this sort of game because it sort of means when you run into something like a tree, if you're only hitting the edge of it, you'll sort of slide off the edge and keep walking. Whereas if you hit it dead on, you might sort of stop. But there are other settings which would mean if you hit something, you stop. So we're going with move and slide, so you kind of keep moving around. That's our script, so we want to make sure we save it like we save everything else. Then I reckon we probably want to go up and hit the play button and see what we get. So let's go and hit play. Fingers crossed. All right, he's bopping up and down, and can we move him? Down, right, up, and left. And also we should have diagonals. Yep, diagonally down, diagonally up. All right, so we've actually got kind of an 8-plane of movement here. That is pretty much where I want to leave us today. So let's go over, have a bit of a debrief, and let you know what we're doing in the next lesson as well. And our must may might for this lesson, well, you must get your character created and get the first animation and that basic movement happening. You may like to also play around with the variable of speed that we put into the script. And something you might like to do if you've got the time is review the Godot documentation for the physics process function, and maybe for the move and slide thing that we had in there too. So to recap today, we've created our character, we've animated their first animation, which is their idle, and we've also scripted a little bit of movement. So next time we will finish the animations for our player character, and we'll also set up the camera from which we will view our character, because you might notice when you're playing around that you can very quickly run off the screen. So that's something we're going to fix in the next one. The quote I'd like to leave you with this time is from Epictetus, and it is, "That which is learned without pleasure is forgotten without remorse." I'll see you next time.